Welcome. This training on attachment, entitled Head and Heart, The Foundations of Healthy Attachment, was created by Tina Blow, licensed psychologist masters from Northeastern Family Institute in Burlington, Vermont. The course has 4 core competencies, and they are: number 1, to understand attachment theory and research; number 2, to understand the importance of a child's attachment on physiological, psychological, and relational outcomes; number 3, to understand the implications of attachment insecurity on the developing child; and number 4, to understand the components and practice of attachment-focused family therapy. The learning objectives of this course include: number 1, participants will learn and identify the key concepts of attachment and attachment theory. Number 2, participants will learn and understand the reasons that youth develop healthy and unhealthy attachment styles. Number 3, participants will understand the necessary components of attachment-focused parenting. And number 4, participants will begin to understand the components of attachment-focused family therapy. Head and Heart, the Foundations of Healthy Attachment. All of us, from the cradle to the grave, are happiest when life is organized in a series of excursions, long or short, from the secure base provided by our attachment figures. Bowlby, 1988. The attachment of caregiver and child is a foundation for neurobiological growth and healthy child development. Attachment formation is accepted as a cultural norm. It is the foundation of neurobiological systems for the child which dictate future emotional regulation, cognitive processes, and social skills. In this module, you will learn: what is attachment? Where does attachment theory originate? What are the components of healthy attachment and the lasting implications on the development of a child? What are the factors leading to unhealthy attachments, and what are the implications on the development of the child? How does trauma impact the caregiving system in the child? And what are the components of family-based treatment which support the development of healthy attachments between caregiver and child? Attachment refers to the nature and quality of interactions that form the essential relationship between a child and caregiver. Attachment is considered the evolutionary biological drive babies have to seek closeness with caregivers for the purpose of survival. Attachment security is the foundation of all later learning. Attachment is a brain-based process, meaning that the brain develops in relation to the environment and experiences that shape it. Attachment typically happens within the context of primary caregiving relationship, but can also refer to secondary caregivers as well. The quality of the caregiver-child relationship serves as a foundation for all future relationships. John Bowlby postulated that attachment is considered the evolutionary biological drive babies have to seek closeness with caregivers for the purpose of survival. The drive is for security and safety. This was first published in The Nature of the Child's Tie to His Mother in 1958. Attachment-seeking behaviors such as crying, cooing, smiling, all serve the function of bringing the caregiver closer in proximity to the child in order to offer soothing, physical comfort, and responsiveness. This happens repeatedly over the course of the child's first critical months of life. As the child grows older, he or she develops other direct actions which serve the same function of proximity seeking, such as whining, clinging, reaching for a caregiver, and other behaviors which bring the caregiver closer. Over time and after repeated cycles of seeking response, the baby comes to develop an expectation that the caregiver will meet their needs. Their neurobiology organizes toward this expectation that they have a secure base or a primary person to meet those needs of hunger, discomfort, loneliness, and fear. The secure base settles the child, decreases discomfort, anxiety, and satiates the need expressed. The secure-based conceptualization places the adult caregiver at the center of a child's security building. The concept also shows that as children grow old enough to explore their environment, the secure base offers a touch point for comfort and refueling for the child. This exploration cycle leads the child to develop confidence and resilience over time. Bowlby originally focused on the mother as the central secure base. However, contemporary literature has extended the importance of primary caregiving to many different caregiving constellations. Bowlby's concept of the internal working model refers to a set of expectations and belief about the self, others, and the relationship between self and others formed based on a child's first relationships. The concept of internal working model shows that what happens in early caregiving attachment relationships has an impact on future relationship formation. Our experiences define what we come to expect from ourselves and others. Our experiences guide our behaviors and expectations in relationship. The term working means that this model can be challenged and changed over time depending on the caregiving context the child is in. Research suggests that exposure to healthy and reliable caregiving, even after experiencing an unhealthy environment, can change a child's internal working model. A healthy internal working model comes from repeated experiences where an adult shows sensitivity toward the child's needs, offers an approach that is relevant and appropriate, and repeated enough times to create brain changes for the child. If the internal working model of a child is not healthy, it can be healed through repeated, relevant, intense relational responses from adults in an environment that is predictable, safe, and enriching. This repeated cycle shown above represents the physical and psychological need of a child, followed by a high state of arousal and seeking behaviors, followed by an attuned response that matches the need, and then a calming. This repeated cycle is the foundation of a healthy attachment system. The result for the child is security, trust in others, even beyond the primary caregiver, healthy self-regulation, and a positive outlook on others and self. The term serve and returned is used to describe the interaction that serves as the building blocks for essential brain architecture. Much like a game of tennis, babies often serve responses, cooing, crying, smiling, to the adult in a very direct way. The adult returns by holding, rocking, or verbalizing to the child in soothing, sing-song tones. These interactions play the critical role of strengthening brain connections between all of the different areas of the baby's brain, helping them develop essential emotional and cognitive skills they need for life. Serve and return interactions start simple and become increasingly complex over time as the child develops language and increasingly sophisticated skills. Mary Ainsworth was the first person to describe patterns of attachment observed in children in 1971 with strange situation exercises. In this study, she observed children's reactions to parents, parents' reactions to children, and the interchange between the two before and after brief separations from the parent and then a reunion. Ainsworth identified secure and insecure patterns in relational interactions. Insecure patterns took on two forms, avoidant and ambivalent. Later, Main and Solomon identified a third style, disorganized. These styles will be discussed later. Tronick's research observed attachment-seeking behaviors in children when parents remained physically close to the children, but offered no facial responses to their attachment-seeking behaviors. Tronick's research is critical because, number one, it became a standard experiment for testing what happens in the caregiver-child relationship when one member is challenged to communicate in a serve and return fashion, as in the example of children with certain developmental challenges or parents suffering from depression. Number two, the still face experiment demonstrated that even very young infants are social beings who understand facial expressions and emotions. They rely on this social reading to calm themselves and intentionally initiate interactions in order to obtain the desired response from caregivers. What would be the features involved in a healthy caregiver-child attachment relationship? There are several features of a caregiver-child relationship which would be considered healthy. Comfort with physical closeness, appropriate physical contact, use of eye contact, and warmth in the interaction are a few. Attachment means that the caregiver is adept at reading the verbal and nonverbal cues sent by the child. The caregiver interprets correctly the messages the child sends via words or behaviors, and then attends to the need that is being expressed by the words or behaviors. Attunement, or mind-mindedness, as coined by Minds in 2001, is seen as that sense that a parent has about the internal world of the child. Reciprocity refers to the positive interplay or dance between a caregiver and child where both are experiencing pleasure within the interaction. This is an important concept because it points out that healthy attachment is a dynamic process involving parent and child in a mutually delightful interaction. Empathy refers to the caregiver's ability to connect to the emotional experience of the child. A child's ability to feel felt by an adult is an essential component of healthy attachment. Nurturance refers to consistent care, which means not only consistent love, but also developmentally appropriate boundaries and expectations. Helping a child learn and build resiliency mean that caregivers understand them as separate entities with specific temperaments and needs. Parenting is not dispensed based on the mood of a parent or based on parental need, but child need. Other caregiver behaviors which appear essential for healthy attachment include flexibility, the ability to offer clear and developmentally appropriate expectations set while also being adaptable and open to child having choice when developmentally appropriate. Adult self-regulation, the ability of the parent to separate the child's behavior from their own sense of self-worth as a parent. This means remaining calm even in the face of a child's challenges. Appropriate boundaries allow for healthy attachment because they create a clear set of expectations and limits, which allow the child to safely explore while also feeling contained. Healthfully attached adults keep the child's developmental needs for boundaries first and are not self-serving in boundary setting. The boundary of discipline is used to teach versus to shame or scare a child. Lastly, attachment-focused communication means that adult articulates developmentally appropriate expectations to the child in positive and healthy ways. The result of healthy attachment on a child is a healthy sense of self and a belief in security in others. The child comes to expect that they will have their needs met in the greater world. They feel genuinely good, lovable, and safe. This resilience allows for the child to explore their world and take risks which build competence and confidence. Dr. Dan Siegel wrote, "Not only are children with secure attachment more prone to be more sociable, to have more intimate relationships, have better grades, and have higher self-esteem, studies have found that the very same model of attachment that we are raised in is the one we will be parenting our own children." He noted that parents with secure internal working models tend to have children who exhibit the same. This means that there are positive and negative implications on many levels to our first attachment relationship on our futures, and that attachment security is inherited. There are many factors related to caregivers, children, and environment which can have influence on the development of secure attachment. A caregiver's own attachment history can be a positive or negative variable on the development of a secure attachment with their children. As stated earlier, attachment security can be passed from generation to generation. How we were taught to relate by our caregivers influences how we relate to our children. In general, younger parents, particularly teen parents, may present with greater challenges in being attuned to the attachment needs of their children. Parenting at a stage of development where your needs are still great as an individual becomes a potential risk factor. Temperament of the parent as compared to that of a child can offer a good enough fit, or can present challenges in the relationship. For example, a parent prone to become easily stressed and a child who is difficult to soothe are likely to have challenges in their attachment relationship without ample support. Lack of physical and emotional availability due to separation or depression can pose risks. Death of a parent is seen as a major adverse child experience that influences the development of a child. Separation for extended periods can also have an adverse impact on attachment security. A parent's intellectual or mental health capacities also influence the attachment relationship. If a parent is not aware of a child's developmental needs or cannot read appropriate serve signals in the relationship due to cognitive or emotional issues, this will impair the attachment relationship. In addition, substance abuse can have a severe impact on the serve and return connection by decreasing the parent's capacities. Child factors which impact the attachment relationship include temperament, prematurity or medical issues, failure to thrive, and other history of abuse, loss, or separation. Medical issues such as failure to thrive refers to the child being hindered from benefiting from what their environment has to offer nutritionally and relationally. Abuse, loss, and separation impact the child's stress response and therefore their ability to trust and benefit from the attachment relationship. In all of these instances, the serve and return interaction is impaired, leaving the child insecure and deprived of the neurological benefit of attachment relationships. Lastly, environmental factors such as poverty, domestic violence within the family system, lack of social support, and high-stress environments interrupt the development of safety and security in the attachment relationship. These events increase the level of stress and preoccupation for the caregiver, leaving them less available and potentially leading them to be harmful to the child. Children are most highly influenced by a regulated caregiving environment in their youngest years. When this environment is dysregulated due to the factors described, this can have a lasting and detrimental impact on the child's attachment capacities. As shown in this slide, the unhealthy attachment sequence begins with a serve response due to a physical or psychological need of the child. The child projects this need to the caregiver via a behavior, crying, and those needs are disregarded or something prevents the parents from responding promptly to the expressed need. The result for the child is an increased arousal state. The child becomes increasingly anxious and urgent in their expression of need. In the most neglectful of situations, the child eventually stops presenting the need and numbs or dissociates. Research of impoverished orphanage environments suggests that dissociation is a common response to neglectful caregiving in infancy. In cases where there is high stress or domestic violence, a child can come to associate the caregiving relationship with threat and danger. This association of threat to the very caregiving relationship that is also supposed to be meeting the child's needs is complicated and difficult to treat. The result of repeated neglect, inconsistent or abusive connections to caregiving is negative self-esteem, a lack of safety, and a lack of trust in relationships. The child is inapt at regulating emotions in healthy ways and tends to begin to develop unhealthy strategies to cope with internal distress. In addition, the child tends to have difficulty in other relationships outside the primary caregiving relationship, such as with peers and teachers. It must be understood that children adapt to the environment they are in ways that allow for their survival. Being avoidant, guarded, secretive, compliant, disruptive, ambivalent, and controlling can all be adaptations to the stress of unhealthy attachments. If we see these adaptations as strategies for survival, we are more capable of having empathy for a child. Attachment insecurity can take many forms. Ainsworth noted several attachment styles children developed as a result of disorganized or unpredictable caregiving. She noted that these styles can either be salient over time or changed if the child's caregiving setting shifted. Impairments in attachment capacities refers to difficulty with social engagement and seeking behaviors for the child. Ainsworth postulated that healthy and securely attached people represent the majority of the population. Within the category of insecure, Ainsworth noted two types: ambivalent anxious and avoidant, each representing about 10 to 20% of her sample. Lastly, the disorganized attachment style, later added by Main et al., represented about 10% of the population, particularly of those children who experienced profoundly traumatizing caregiving relationships. Securely attached children have benefited from the consistency and predictability of having their needs met by an adult in a repetitive and organizing way. Securely attached children exhibit appropriate distress when separated from their primary caregiver. They use the caregiver as a secure base, which allows them to then explore their environment. They seek the primary caregiver readily when distressed. These children develop object constancy, or the ability to hold in mind the primary caregiver, or the secure base, even when the caregiver is not physically present, to soothe themselves. These children present as resilient, able to recite a coherent narrative about their life, and can utilize a mental representation of their primary caregiver to soothe themselves in early childhood, even when the primary caregiver is not physically present. In later childhood and adolescence, these children manage thoughts, feelings, and behaviors effectively on their own, feel confident and competent, and tend to do well in relationships. Children with ambivalent attachment styles often have experienced unpredictable, inconsistent caregiving. Parents can be inconsistent and preoccupied with their own needs, or intrusive and entangled to the degree that the child's needs are not prioritized. Ambivalently attached children can be clingy to adults, and then conversely rejecting, especially during times of distress. Ambivalently attached toddlers do not leave caregivers' side to explore the environment. The children can be highly attuned to transitions and separations from caregivers and will work to control in order to avoid feelings of distress they experience during the episodes. These children can exaggerate emotional reactions in order to get validation and attention. They generally desire to have adults in their lives, but they are also fearful of relationships. In relationships with peers, these children can be preoccupied with meeting their own needs, and this interferes with friendship building. Despite a high degree of insecurity in relationships, ambivalently attached children can present with a superficial charm with strangers. Children with an insecure avoidant style, often the result of rejecting cold and distant or neglectful caregiving, often do not have an expectation that their needs will be met by adults. These children can present a challenge in the classroom because they can appear precociously independent and even avoid asking help from caregivers. Due to their expectation that their needs will not be met, they can be dismissive and indifferent with adults. In relationships, they can present as controlling and aloof. They can present with restricted affect, denying feelings that appear obvious, and tend to be emotionally cynical. Children with a disorganized attachment style often come from caregiving settings which are unpredictable, rejecting, and dangerous. Caregivers often present as chaotic and neglectful. This dynamic leaves the child feeling the desire to seek care from the adult, but also a fear and increase in distress. The term disorganized is used to represent the profound confusion the child has about seeking closeness. As stated earlier, our internal working model of a relationship comes from repetitive experiences of safe, predictable caregiving. When experiences of care are disorganizing, or aggressive or threatening, the child also learns that they cannot trust their own perceptions and experiences. The child becomes compulsively self-reliant and controlling of others. They may also have extreme emotional and behavioral reactions to distress that do not seem to make sense and are not easily calmed by environment or by adults. A child who has experienced developmental trauma within the attachment relationship can often present with behavioral difficulties such as aggression or withdrawal. It might be more difficult to soothe, which could cause higher levels of frustration in his caregiver and in turn lead to maltreatment or attachment difficulties. Developmental trauma refers to experiences the child has within their development which promote fear and helplessness and which change the way they think, feel, and act. Traumatic experiences take place within the caregiving relationship, disrupting the secure base for the child. Disruptions from developmental trauma rob the child of developmental progress, creating difficulties with affect regulation, causing attachment disturbance, creating challenges and emotional shifts in behavioral regulation, robbing the child of bodily regulation, such as sleep, bodily functions, self-care, eating, and promoting feelings of helplessness and self-hatred. The traumatic events might interfere with the child-caregiver attachment due to strong emotions that get in the way of a positive relationship. For example, a child's anger toward her parent for not keeping her safe, a parent's guilt about the event, or a parent's resentment toward his child for causing pain and family upheaval all too often impede positive child-parent interactions and attachment. The caregiver or child could serve as a trigger to the other's arousal or re-experiencing traumatic stress symptoms, making a secure attachment difficult. If the caregiver has their own trauma history, her symptoms, such as emotional numbing or avoidance, might interfere with attending sensitively to her child. Chronic trauma and attachment disturbance leaves a child feeling alone, isolated, and misunderstood. Shame becomes a central feature of a child's presentation. They feel ashamed of who they are, where they came from, and what they do, with a core sense that they are bad and unlovable. Shame then becomes a strong barrier to progress as it separates the child from the caregiver and does not allow for the resolution of pain. Often what gets the attention of school and the outside world are internalizing or externalizing behaviors of the attachment-challenged child. What is missed is the underlying shame that often drives this behavior. When children experience trauma in the context of attachment relationships, it just makes sense that healing would come through shifting the caregiver context and improving the caregiver's ability to attend to the child's needs. It may not always be possible to work with the original primary caregiver, but when possible, this should be done. Adoptive parents, foster parents, kinship caregivers, and even residential staff can and should be an integral part of the therapeutic process when possible, as it is the attachment between the child and caregiver that becomes the healing force. Individual therapy with a child who has experienced disruptions in attachment and traumatic events is less likely to be effective in the absence of an attachment figure. In some cases, the connection with the therapist may also serve to undermine the primary caregiving relationship if the caregiver is not present. As the co-therapist, the caregiver can learn to attune, connect, and support the repair of damaged internal working models the child holds. The therapeutic environment with a caregiver present serves as a safe haven to explore hurts of the past. The caregiver learns through modeling and direct teaching how to become a safe base for the child and how to meet their developmental needs through consistency and predictability. The therapist actively teaches the parent to co-regulate the child's emotions and behaviors. As a witness to the caregiving relationship, the therapist can more effectively coach the parent to respond in therapeutic ways. As the child works on integrating traumas into the narratives of their life, the child can also see the impact of their life experiences on their primary caregiver. This shared experience tends to enhance and deepen the relationship. Family therapy allows for all members of the family to generalize skills at home outside of the therapeutic context. The family therapist also acts as a coach and advocate to help parents improve skills outside of the session. The PACE model, offered by Dr. Daniel Hughes, suggests a stance that caregivers can take which allows for healing to begin for children with attachment disturbance. The model, rests upon the principle that home should be a sanctuary, a safe haven for all. The rights of all members of the home, children and adults, deserve respect. The development of each person is encouraged without hurting the development of another. The PACE stance is the foundation for all attachment-focused family therapy. The P in PACE stands for playfulness. Increasing playfulness between caregiver and child is essential for a variety of reasons. First, trauma decreases spontaneity, and hypervigilance robs children of playful capacities such as joy in relationships, creativity, and imagination. These must be renewed with the caregiver in order for true safety to be established. Playfulness creates a relaxed feeling for the child and interjects positivity even as threatening topics are being explored. Playfulness teaches the child that although there may be tension in the relationship, they are loved. Playfulness generates hope. The A in PACE stands for acceptance. Acceptance means that the parent consistently sends a message to their child that their thoughts, feelings, and memories are understood and validated. With unconditional regard for the child, any need for discipline can focus on connection before correction. What this means is that the child's shame is decreased by a non-judgmental approach. Acceptance helps to prevent a child from feeling judged, threatened, and scared. Acceptance by caregivers also decreases the teen's temptation to defy, avoid, or rage. The more that power and control become an issue between caregiver and child, the less effective discipline becomes. This can create unwanted side effects of discipline: deceit, submissiveness, withdrawal, anger, and defiance. The C in PACE stands for curiosity. Curiosity helps caregivers to remain energized and able to see problems as vulnerabilities and not personal attacks. By being curious, the caregiver becomes a feelings detective with the child in an attempt to see what is underlying the behaviors exhibited by the child. Curiosity promotes attunement and communicates the central importance of the child to the parent. Curiosity decreases the defensive positioning, and curiosity helps caregivers inhibit their first reactions to a child. Finally, the E in PACE stands for empathy. Empathy is attunement to the inner emotional experience of the child. When empathy is expressed, the result is a child who feels, felt, and understood by their caregiver. This creates a resonant brain-to-brain experience for parent and child, leading to trust. Empathy helps establish and maintain an in-sync feeling between parent and child. Empathy authenticates the child's experience and teaches them to trust their own instincts. Empathy is an emotion-based process, visceral and extremely impactful to the mind and body. Statements that convey empathy: "You really think I don't understand or care? Wow, that must be hard. It makes me feel sad that you really think I feel that way." Attachment-focused parenting emphasizes the importance of the nonverbal presence of the parent. Eye contact, facial expressions, tone of voice, and body positioning all serve to create a sense of safety for the child. The idea is that safety is reestablished for the child, allowing them to feel contained as they process hurtful and threatening life experiences. A positive nonverbal presence shows the child that the parent is available, aware of their needs, sensitive, consistent, and predictable. They see that the adult is working cooperatively to meet their needs and is doing so in a developmentally relevant way. Trauma impacts the course of development. Therefore, caregivers must understand that the child may have a need to regress developmentally for periods of time in order to redo and repair from experiences where their needs were rejected or disregarded. A tone of safety, playfulness, and directness is established from the first session in an attachment-focused family therapy. Children must know that they will be safe no matter what, because the therapist and caregiver will work to ensure it. They also must know that the caregiver will be present the entire session and that they will not be left alone. This reinforced that the caregiver is ultimately the safe base for the child both in and outside the sessions. There is a direct focus from the beginning of treatment about the reason the child is coming to therapy. A direct approach to the hurts and fears the child has experienced exemplifies that the topic is not taboo, and adults are not going to avoid it. Expectations are set that the adults are in charge of making sure he or she is safe at all times, and that the caregivers remain in the room to make sure safety is maintained. Prior to the start of each session, the therapist should address the child's safety, security, and wellness needs. This offers the child an experience of attunement to their basic needs related to hunger, comfort, and safety. Explain the need for the child to know that the caregiver is paying attention and overseeing safety and security of the child. The central job of the therapist throughout each session is to track present-day experiences and reactions the child has, which often go unnoticed to them. It is imperative that the therapist observe the child's nonverbal experience, body movements, skin tone, sensory, posture, for physiological evidence of arousal. Second, the therapist must observe both the child's experience of competence and trauma-related defenses the child has established. Simple statements about what you notice will increase awareness for the child and parent. This is a very different response than commenting on behavior. For example, Joey, I noticed that your body just went on alert when your mom was about to tell me what happened at school. Did you notice that too, Mom? When an adult matches the affect of a child and is able to articulate the emotional experience of that child, the ultimate result is safety and comfort. It allows the child to deepen their relationship with themselves and with the caregiver. Similarly, if the therapist asks the parent to role play while the therapist speaks for the child, this gives the opportunity for the child's inner experience to come alive in the therapy. They become the director of their life story and feel deeply understood in the process. Speaking for the child or about the child to the caregiver also puts words to feelings that often elude the child. Rather than asking the child why, there is a wondering about the underlying emotions and intention of the behavior. Children do not experience adults being curious enough about their inner life, so when they do, it is rich and meaningful. To be curious means that adults do not know for sure, and the child can confirm or deny the explanation. Body awareness games allow for the child to understand first that their body exists and has reactions, and second, to pay closer attention. Trauma leaves children focusing outward, typically to survive the threat. These experiences, teaching belly breathing, taking heart rate, and learning how to increase and decrease heart rate, gives the child a sense of mastery over their body's experience. Similarly, it is up to the therapist to notice subtle, nonverbal responses in the child based on what is happening in the room. This brings the focus to the present moment and focuses on the child making meaning of why their body is reacting in such a way. Mirroring exercises replicate the serve and return interaction and leave the child feeling connected and important in the eyes of the caregiver. Within mirror exercises, it is important the child play the role of leader and follower with the caregiver so that they may experience equal pleasure with both. The general feeling in attachment-focused family therapy is one of collaboration and curiosity. The therapist is often wondering about what he or she sees and how this connects to the child's experience. When necessary, the therapist must also lead into topics that the child is seeking to avoid, such as the trauma narrative. This intervention also replicates the serve and return of an infant and caregiver. Throughout each session, the parent is guided to model protective behaviors in a playful way. Games such as tug-of-war between therapist and parent serve to set the tone that the child is claimed by the parent and meant to be protected by them. The parent is often put in charge of being the expert on their child, while the child listens and feels understood. Connection before correction refers to the concept that children with attachment challenges often struggle when offered redirection. Unlike typically developed children who can tolerate brief relational disruptions due to correction from a parent, Attachment-challenged children often require the parent to connect first and then offer correction. Ruptures in the relationship due to behavioral acting out should be met with a swift response and immediate repair to support the child in avoiding further acting out provoked by shame and fear. For example, if a 7-year-old child has taken items from their parent without asking, a common behavior in children with attachment challenges, the following response is suggested. Joey, I know you decided to take my watch to keep with you. It seems like you did not know how to tell me what you wanted, and maybe you were afraid I would say no or get mad. It is important for us to stay close, and I know this kind of stuff does not make you feel good. Let's talk about some things of mine you can hold with you to feel safe, and then let's check in each day to make sure that taking is not happening. After the therapist has established good rapport, has begun to use language which emphasizes awareness of the body and co-regulation with the parent is clearly mastered, there is a foundation to explore trauma-related material. It is important that the parents and therapist are aligned about the central narrative of the child or the story of what happened and how it has impacted this child. This allows them to explore together how the child has formed responses to relationships and environment based on their early life experience. Responses should be seen as a way the child learned to survive tough situations. In other words, if they could do things differently, they would. Throughout the process of therapy, memories or responses are brought to the surface and the implicit is made explicit. The ultimate goal of therapy is to make meaning of life events and a child's responses to them in such a way that the child is freed from feelings of blame, self-hatred, and shame. In attachment-focused family therapy, there is a strong emphasis on the caregiving system. It is typical for the therapist to have monthly sessions with the caregiver alone to make sure the resources of the parent are high and the alignment to the therapist is secure. In parent guidance sessions, the goals are to ensure the resilience of the caregiver given the intensity of therapeutic parenting that is necessary for children with attachment challenges. The parent must be validated for their efforts and provided with empathy about the difficulties of parenting children who often struggle to give back in the relationship. In addition, it is important to explore reactions to caregiving that may be impacted by the parent's own internal working model from their experience of being parented. It is important for caregivers to understand that parenting a child with attachment challenges can lead you to be vulnerable at times and to take the behaviors of the child personally. The risk is that the attachment-challenged child will read this behavior as rejection and a cycle of reactivity may ensue. Caregivers must understand that their children may provoke feelings of rejection in them and place them on the defensive as parents. This negative feedback loop between parent and child must be challenged and avoided as much as possible, as it is likely a reenactment of the child's early experiences. Lastly, caregiver-therapist meetings help to decrease the risk of vicarious or secondary trauma, which is a phenomenon that is common for caregivers of children with trauma and attachment challenges. The bond between parent and child is chemical, fierce, and inexplicable. This connection cannot be measured. It is more subtle and more powerful than science. This concludes today's presentation on attachment. For a list of resources, please refer to the following slides.